guys, so I cannot stop watching the True Scary Stories animated by Corpse Husband. I've already spent a long time watching these videos. I've been putting it off and putting it off, and I don't know why, because I love like horror stories, and I know that they've been having like the true story animated ones that are more like lighthearted and try to be like over the top or funny, whereas these are just they seem really realistic. Besides like the last one that I watched that was with the Skinwalker. Um, but I mean, maybe I'm just have never run into a Skinwalker before. But I do want to watch some more. So he has another video out. I don't know why I keep clicking that. That's the compilation 2. And it's just as long as the other one, but I think I'm going to split it up in a couple videos. But I really want to watch this, so let's watch it. The Bag Lady.
I've always had a innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night and the safety offered by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green right when you finally decide to just run it. So, of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night. But earlier that week I had heard the phrase, character is what you do when no one is looking, and for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out of my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and that all my windows were up. I then moved my right.
That brings me, I just got a new car. I got it in September, and I still have trouble to find the lock button or the window button. Like in that moment, it takes me a solid like 10 or 15 seconds of just feeling around. So if this ever happened to me, I'm screwed.
Foot above the accelerator just in case and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would just be an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me so I could just get out of there. But I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag, and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her and she mentioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said,
"My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?"
I should stop and give you a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and kind of an indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20 plus years on the street, or she was 60-something years old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, like she was disconnected for the moment. That made my skin crawl. And after a brief, maybe about a second debate on whether I should do it, I told her that I had to get home and that I couldn't give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again.
"My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?"
This time I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a
Not to
third
be
time and
mad,
began her
man.
statement again.
My boyfriend beat me up.
At this point, the light changed and I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, looked down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since.
You made the right decision.
Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do or if there were more people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since. And had...
Sorry to pause right there, but it sounds like even her just saying that he made the right decision, and every time that he declined her, she didn't try and make up another excuse for her to get into the car. She just said the same thing in that robotic voice, and it sounds like he said there were other people maybe like hiding in the bush that forced her to do that for like whatever situation that she was in, and she owed somebody money or was in like an abusive relationship where somebody forced her to do that. But it sounds like she didn't really want to, and she didn't care to try to convince him, and was almost like good choice of not letting me in the car because that's what these people would have done to you. That's really
has
interesting because it's so
confirmed
real.
in my mind that nothing good happens after dark.
That's not true. I really like these stories because like they're so...
I was on an equestrian team throughout middle school with about 9 other girls. My coach's name was Deborah, and one of the most awesome things about Deborah was that she'd always take our teams on reward trips or events. Trips included outings such as movies, water park dates, or just barn sleepovers. This particular trip was a trail ride overnight. We were ecstatic as trail overnights were only a summer thing, and it was one of the first ones of the year. Basically, a trail overnight was a weekend that we would go on a 3-day-long trail ride. We'd pack a bag or two, meet up on Friday morning at the stable, load up our horses and bags into the 3 trailers, and be on our way. That was exactly how it happened this particular trip. Everything went exactly as it should have, and we set off to a trail near the Sleeping Bear Dunes as I live in rural Michigan. Things got odd a few hours into the trip. We had all left at about 7 in the morning, so that left us with plenty of daylight to do fun stuff after we got settled into the campsite. Deb had us all saddle up to go along the lakeshore trail. Once everyone was in the saddle, we set off on a narrow, single-file only trail that wound through some woods and eventually would lead us to an overlook of the beach. I was completely in my zone. My horse, Aries, was not. It was like he and a few other horses were sensing something that nobody else did. But we chalked it up to being in a new place that we had never camped before. Being that Aries was a Mustang, I thought maybe his wild instincts were kicking in after a few years of being domesticated as well. At about 7 o'clock that evening, while Deb and the stable hand Carla cooked up hot dogs and the rest of us had to come back from swimming, I decided to take Aries out for a quick trot and a loop around the campsite in hopes to calm him down. I grabbed my helmet and mounted up, not bothering to grab reins or saddle up, and just tied the lead rope to the other side of his halter. The ride went how I expected it to, with Aries acting up. Although this time his behavior was different. He didn't just seem agitated, he seemed distressed, like something was really scaring him. I looked around and couldn't see a thing. No deer, no bears, no other horseback riders or mountain bikers or anything. I decided to go down a little trail that would wind back up at the campsite after about 5 minutes rather than just going in a loop. This is where it hit the fan. We had been going for about 2 minutes on this little trail when I started feeling funny, like we were being watched. I turned around and nobody was there. At one point of the trail, we came across a big boulder, and this was where Aries stopped completely. No amount of nudging or encouragement budged him. He absolutely refused to go any further. I slid off his back and tried pulling him to no avail. That's when I noticed where his eyes were focused. He wasn't looking at me, but over my shoulder. Slowly, I turned around and saw a tall, dark figure about 50 yards away, maybe less, standing ahead of us on the trail, not moving, even though I'm sure he heard us. I didn't know what to do. Was he a hiker? It was obviously a man, but he had no pack, no bike, nothing. He was holding something in his hand though. A walking stick, maybe. I didn't want to bother him or go near him as his presence had given me the creeps. I whispered to Aries that we were going back and slowly climbed on. As soon as I was situated and I looked back at the man though, my heart dropped. The figure had turned towards us, watching. I could tell because I could faintly make out the zipper of his jacket. There was no doubt he had seen and heard us, so there was no point in trying to be subtle. I offered a wave, trying to signal I was out of there and wouldn't be a bother. Aries was more than happy to oblige. When I looked back again, my heart dropped even further and I froze. The figure was getting larger. The man was chasing us, running at full speed. I saw what was in his hand, a machete? It couldn't be, but it sure looked like some kind of weapon. I said Aries' name loudly in fear, and he knew what I wanted. He kicked into overdrive as the man had caught up to about 10 yards away from us. Mustangs are fast, and Aries was no exception. That made hanging on without a saddle a bit difficult, but I somehow knew that if I fell, my life was over. And just my luck, I did fall. Aries had put some distance between us and the man to where I could no longer hear or see him, but it didn't take long for the machete guy to come within hearing range. The man came up over the hill of the trail and spotted me immediately. I knew I was doomed. The man started towards me, and before I could bolt, I heard the thundering sound of hooves speeding in my direction. The man, although I couldn't see his face beneath the hood of his jacket, I could tell he was looking behind me. I turned to and had to dive out of the way. Aries was speeding towards the man in like a freight train. I couldn't believe what I saw. Before the guy could dive out of the way, Aries struck him with full force and trampled him, making the guy yell out in pain. He lay there limply. More than likely a bone or two was broken. Aries was big for a Mustang, and being hit and run over by any horse isn't going to leave you without injury. Aries disappeared over the hill for a second, then came back and ran the man over a second time. He stopped long enough for me to scramble onto his back, and we sped to the campsite. I told Deb and the rest of the group that we needed to call the police and get the hell out of there. As soon as I told Deb, she had us pack our stuff up and get in the trailer and trucks while she called the police. They didn't take too long to arrive, as there were usually some scouting around the area we were in. I told them everything that had happened, and that the man may still be laying where we had left him because Aries had trampled him pretty badly. We didn't stick around long enough to find out, but we learned that the guy I had encountered had previously been arrested for assault with intent to kill. How he had gotten into the woods, I'll never have any clue. I do know that I owe my life to my horse, as I wouldn't be here to tell this story had I not been with him. People say horses are dumb animals, but I think Mustangs are different. I think if Aries had not been wild before, he wouldn't have been able to recognize the threat. Anyway, that's my story. If there are any fellow riders out there, or even just hikers or mountain bikers, whatever you might do on the trail, I recommend you don't go do it alone.
That's so cool. I love stories that involve just senses from animals that something's off, and man, they just know what to do. Horses are so cool. They freak me out though. I don't know what it is, but I think that's all I'm going to watch for right now. I'll probably release one right after and finish this video again. I really love these. Anyways, thank you for anybody that watched this, and I hope you have a really good day.